Building muscle is not about doing 1,000 different things and hoping to get great results. Building muscle is about doing a few key things effectively over and over again for a long period of time. I'm talking about weeks, months, years, and even decades to truly get the most out of your efforts in the gym. And with that in mind, your main goal should be to throw out everything that's not working for you and not serving you, and focus on the few key things that are. And you should hammer away at them relentlessly. As someone who's been training for 20 years, retired from competing almost 10, and coaching people for over 15, I've thrown out way more ideas than I've kept, but I've also picked up a few key principles that I will forever keep in my training. I call these game changers. Game changers because once I started applying them, my results skyrocketed. Not only the results I get, but also the results I'm able to get from my clients. Now, of course, this isn't a list of the only things you should be doing, but if you're not applying these right now and you do implement them into your training, these are things that you absolutely can affect to amplify your results, far beyond the results you'll get by skipping them. Today, I'm going to share my top 3 with you in no particular order. The first one is high frequency training. When I first started training, I did the typical 1 body part per week split. I trained chest on Monday, back on Tuesday, legs on Wednesday, shoulders on Thursday, and arms on Friday. I did that for a few years, and it made complete sense. Hammer a muscle into the ground, take a full week off to give the muscle time to recover, time to grow, come back stronger, and then do it again. The only problem was I was crippling myself with excessive volume, lots of failure training, and I was walking around sore for 5 to 6 days at a time. And this all would have been fine with me if I was getting great results, but I wasn't. Some weeks I'd barely match the previous week's performance, and it ultimately just ended up being a cycle of excessive stimulus, followed by 2 to 4 days that it would take for me to recover back to baseline, then followed by another 3 to 5 days of detraining. And ultimately, the end result was just spinning my wheels week after week. But don't get me wrong, body part splits can work. Many pro bodybuilders have used them successfully. However, what many people need to understand is that pro bodybuilders in the real world, they're anomalies, and they're not always the best example for people to look to on how to maximize progress. And for the average person, I could find more cases of poor results due to a body part training split than any other training style. For me, the game changer was throwing out that once per week training frequency, and in return, training body parts at least twice per week. And the immediate result I got from this style of training was the post-workout soreness, or the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness, that completely went away. My body compensated from the increased frequency, allowing for faster recovery time. This is known as the repeated bout effect, something that's very well understood by the science-based community. And it's one of the reasons that high-level athletes in any sport get great results performing exercises on a frequent basis. It's not uncommon at all for powerlifters to train a lift 3, 4, 5 times per week, even up to every single day. Now, of course, volume and intensity needs to be adjusted accordingly, and recovery needs to be prioritized. So don't just take your typical training plan and perform it twice a week instead of once, but at the very least, take your current training plan and split it up over 2 sessions opposed to cramming it all into 1 session. For example, if you train 16 sets of chest on Monday, try performing 8 sets on Monday and then 8 sets on Thursday. Same total weekly volume, but now a more frequent stimulus. This is generally easier to recover from and manage. Not to mention, your nervous system will become more proficient at lifting, which is a skill. And as a result, performance will increase. Now, you don't have to train every single body part more than once per week, but especially if you're just not getting results out of your current training, I highly recommend you train at least your lagging muscle groups 2 or more times per week. Game changer number 2. Deloads. Most people who are looking to build muscle, they understand the basics. Train a muscle hard, give it time to recover, compensate, and come back bigger and stronger. But most people, they never address this beyond the basic level. As a beginner, you just don't have the ability to generate much muscle damage or fatigue, as that requires a high level of skill. And the more proficient you become at lifting, the greater stimulus you can place on your body to grow. But you could also impose a much larger inroad into your recovery. And as you enter the intermediate and advanced stages in your training, and you want to maximize your results, you need to become hyper aware of how much fatigue you're generating and how much recovery you need for that stimulus. Most assume that a few days of rest before the next time you train that muscle group is sufficient. But what many don't realize is fatigue is systemic, not just local, meaning it's built up across the entire body and it affects the entire body as a whole. If you hammer away on legs on Monday and then you train chest on Tuesday, your legs are recovering, but as you train chest, your body is still carrying the fatigue caused by the leg training session on Monday. And every training session that you do during that week, it adds to that level of fatigue. All this fatigue that's built up, your body needs to recover from. And if you just disregard this and just continue to train, eventually your training will outpace your body's recovery ability. This is when you might start to notice performance decreases. Strength might dip temporarily, motivation might decline, you might get poor pumps in the gym, and training sessions just might feel off. This is generally a state of overreaching, and most people, they'll claim you need to avoid this state like the plague. You might hear many programs or internet gurus tell you this is the exact reason you're not growing, when in actuality, this might be the time that your body experiences the greatest adaptation from training, provided you follow this up with an active rest period, or a deload. At this point, the stimulus is the highest that it can be, but fatigue levels, they're high as well. Now, if we pull back on the training at this point, fatigue will drop and the body not only can recover, but actually supercompensate, simply dropping down the intensity of training or the volume of training or a combination of both. Doing this for a week or two, this should actually have you coming back bigger and stronger. Of course, if you do this correctly. This can be done as frequently as once every 4 to 6 weeks, or as long as once every 8 to 12 weeks, depending on how you structure your training. I used to train year-round with intensity as high as possible, and most of the time, I spent it beat up. Truthfully, at best, I was just aiming to hold on to my previous week's performance. Now, once I started implementing deloads, I was able to consistently train hard, recover, and come back stronger. I was able to repeat this process over weeks, months, and years. Game changer number 3. Reps in reserve. Now, this is not in the traditional sense, where most guys will say you only need to train 3 or 4 reps near failure. This is reps in reserve with the goal of training each exercise with the appropriate amount of intensity. As mentioned previously, I started out with the idea that intensity needs to be through the roof at all times. Every set should be taken to failure, and you should never leave anything on the table. Now, I'm not one to say that you should be training with 3, 4, or 5 reps left in the tank. If you do that and you're anything but a ranked beginner, you're leaving gains on the table. But there's also an appropriate intensity for each exercise, and they shouldn't be categorized as a whole. And more specifically, all-out failure training, it isn't appropriate for every movement. And if you notice, some of those exercises are actually not used by many HIIT advocates. For example, let's take something like a hip hinge movement. I generally recommend 1 to 2 reps left in the tank on these movements. As we approach failure, a high-risk movement like this becomes even more high risk on the last 1 to 2 reps. Being such a technical lift, form and technique can easily break down as we approach failure. This not only no longer trains the target muscle effectively, but it also obviously puts the body at a higher risk of injury. Now, more stable exercises like, let's say, machines, or isolation movements like press downs and curls, these are obviously much better well suited for failure training. And in general, more higher volume training programs done with free weights, most movements tend to work best by leaving 1 to 2 reps left in the tank. This helps you to avoid missing reps with higher risk barbell movements, and you can also rack up more effective training volume. This is a topic that I could go much deeper on, and it's something that's not often spoken about, as most people categorize a set as a set, but exercise difficulty, the type of movement it is, and whether it's a machine, cable, or free weight exercise, that all plays a role into when you should be training to failure. Just look at the training of most lower volume HIIT guys. Most train with lots of stable machine variations. Look back at most old school bodybuilders, guys who trained almost exclusively with free weights. Most of them generally trained with 1 to 2 reps left in the tank. Now, when I started implementing this on most barbell and compound movements and reserving more direct failure training on a much less frequent basis, my recovery got better, my performance increased, and I was able to consistently come back bigger and stronger over time. Now, these are all training principles you've probably heard about, but if you haven't implemented them already, I'm willing to bet you're not getting the most out of your training. And if that's you, I highly recommend you incorporate them into your training and see what type of results you get. And if you want the exact programs that I personally recommend to build muscle using proven old school bodybuilding methods, all my old school mass game programs are down below. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.